Hi, and welcome to Feely Fine Arts. We are delighted today to present our first exhibition with Mark Igloliorte, hopefully not the last. I would like to introduce Mark, who will be speaking about the show and also about the making of the show in this video. So for those of you who could not make it today to meet Mark in person, I will let you meet him virtually. So here's Mark, and he will be talking about his works.
Yeah, all right, thank you, Pat. Really enjoy having the work in the space, and looking forward to talking about it with my sister. When I was doing the paintings at each step, like I was thinking about the process of painting and the process of working with language. Yeah. And so a lot of the words like speak to that. Like there's one, it's like trial and error. There's another which is like, this is good, you know, and that, I don't know, I like kind of thinking about the process of trying to make these work as paintings and then have the words reflect that back as they're kind of like speaking to me about how to make them.
None of them are like, I don't know what I'm doing.
well,
why did I put those two colors together?
Well, definitely with the trial and error.
Yeah.
You know, like just trying to figure it out and taking chances as I was going along with the different color combinations.
Well, it's kind of like learning language too, right? Like having to sort of go back and repeat and try things out and try to make it stick.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, totally.
They're beautiful. Tell me about these paints. Just teasing. I know you love this paint.
Well, no, I don't mind telling you about the paint. It was there's a small spray paint shop in Vancouver called Layout Art Supply, and it's in East Van.
Yeah.
They just have like this huge wall of spray paint in like hundreds of different hues. I just went in and picked the most appealing colors that were speaking to me at that time, between like a pastel set and this more colorful set.
Yeah.
So I knew I wanted to do like a sibling series, like two series together, and let different things happen in them, and I thought like a pastel set was a good place to start because it was like something really unifying.
This was the first set?
This is the first set,
okay.
Yeah. Okay. Because part of me knew that it would be a little bit more forgiving to paint because it wouldn't be as many different kinds of color bouncing off one another. So if there's something unifying about the pastel, then it's going to work better or more straightforward. So yeah, I started with these, and for all of the compositions of color, I was working with split complementary. So rather than like straight complementary of like red and green, it'll be like red and yellow green or red and yellow blue, you know, and just trying to get creative with how those colors come together in the gradients and combinations between the different gradients and the drop shadows. I was having such a good time.
Yeah, but they really pop on the dark wall. I think that's really working here.
Yeah, well, I think like for the pastel, I think it would just kind of like blend into the wall a little bit more for a white. So yeah, for sure, it like helps pop it out.
Are you going to keep going with this series?
Well, when I was invited to go to Prince Edward Island for Art in the Open, like I was able to adapt this work to working with Inuktitut and Migma. And the way I did that was to put Migma on the top of the skateboard on the grip tape and then Inuktitut on the bottom. And so with that, the idea was to invite the local skateboarders to do tricks, and there was some wordplay. Like as the board would flip underneath them, the words would kind of like change.
Yeah, yeah.
And like one of the translations was like, I found a translation for so in both of the languages.
Yeah, yeah.
And I like that kind of like that kind of more laid back encouragement. Oh, that was so, And another translation was kickflip. And with those, when I was invited, I thought like, oh, okay, this is 2 wall installations. What could be interesting in terms of like doing a public performance was like be able to invite local skateboarders to have an experience with Indigenous language.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily so much about my experience with the Indigenous language. I feel like these are very kind of like autobiographical. Like I feel like I'm reaching out to the audience and sharing with them something with them for sure, but it's kind of coming from my point of view.
Yeah.
Whereas when I went to PEI, I was like, well, what can I offer in terms of like an experience for other people? And I think that's why it's so important to use Migma, is because like that's the language of the people there. I got to work with a Migma skateboarder.
Yeah, it was
really
cool that
amazing.
a Migma skateboarder showed up and did the project with you. Like,
oh yeah,
it was kind of an amazing call out.
Yeah, that was TJ. He killed it. He was like an amazing skateboarder. But there were so many like skaters in Charlottetown that were just killing it that day, and we had such a fun event. And it was really cool to get so much community support and ultimately just like have that Indigenous language like out in the world.
Yeah.
When you see it like in different institutions, like in the signage or acknowledgement, like land acknowledgement, it has a meaning,
Yeah.
And like the language has this power of having people relate to one another differently and relate to these institutions differently.
Yeah.
So I think for me, like starting to think about working with Indigenous language as text, it was like, for so long, I'd always felt a little alienated by my language because I stumble over the pronunciation.
Yeah.
But like text as a visual medium, that's something that I could work with, because as a painter I work with visual things.
Yeah.
And to kind of like to go from working with text as something on an oil painting, which you'll see in other parts of this exhibition.
Yeah.
That was such a long process, because oil paint is such a long process. Whereas with spray paint, I was just like, it's just happening. It was like such a great release, like spending months on like a series of 12 paintings, years actually, and then to go from that to seconds. But it's both painting, it's both Indigenous text and Anittâ like coming out that way. And it was just fun to kind of like work with a different kind of paint as well.
Yeah, I like it on skateboards because it's like, this is who you are. You're an Inuk who is a skateboarder, who's an artist, and it really just speaks to the sort of dynamism of Inuit culture, I think. And I hope that it's not a surprising media for people to see it in, but to think about Inuit language and skateboarding and I think that it does something really interesting, but then when you perform it, it adds that other level, like you said, of like, using kickflip as kind of a translated term.
Yeah, and one of the things I liked about like being in Charlottetown and doing that is that I've always found the skateboarding community to be really supportive.
Yeah.
And, like I find sometimes like putting Indigenous work out there, you feel a little vulnerable because you don't know how it's going to be received. Some people are actually kind of hostile to like acknowledging Indigenous presence, and continued presence, as we experienced in PEI when, we had some people in our outdoor talk, like come by and disrupt things.
Yeah, yeah.
So to go from like an experience to that, to go to an experience where I'm with a bunch of strangers, but skateboarders in general is a very kind of like welcoming and accepting community. Like we have something unifying about ourselves.
Yeah.
And so to be able to kind of like take something I feel a little special to me and share it with a group of strangers, like skateboarding made sense for me in that. And then with this work here in the gallery, I just loved like the visual aspect of skateboarding. I love in a skate shop is like how like dense you can make that wall of boards. And I think that like there's definitely like some skateboard brands out there like Baker and Shake Junt, which use text heavily in their graphics.
Yeah.
And this is something that I'm riffing off there in terms of like using the board as a place for text, and that, I don't know, that text or just what those brands stand for, like that there's some kind of energy that can be conveyed visually. So that's what I'm looking to do with like using like our father's Indigenous language in this work. So you're asking me about this word kunulik, and it translates to fade. So obviously it's a reference to the gradients that I'm working with here. And one of the things I discovered in this process is like working with a gradient kind of like diagonally, like if there was a center line, it would be kind of like this. And like how that, how you go from a yellow to like a kind of gray. And what's interesting is playing with the text is that I use the same yellow up here, and how that changes as you make your way across. Like it goes here to kind of like bleeding into the image or into the background, sorry, and then over here it's got like this level of contrast. And with this particular like pastel series, it's all kind of faded, so it doesn't, I find it's almost more of an aesthetic experience. It's not like white and black stenciled text on, I don't know, a loading dock or something like that, where you usually see this kind of like spray painted text. It's more of an aesthetic experience in that you get to kind of like spend some time with those color choices and how they feel. Like you got this like pastel red purple with this like kind of like dusty yellow, and I don't know about other people, but for me, I feel a lot of energy from that color. It's like really great to look at. And so this idea of like, there's a word for fade in Inuktitut. It speaks to what's going on in this painting. And even in this arrangement, like rather than a grid, I've shifted a bit so it's kind of like a little bit more faded, or it's not so rigid. And yeah, so with all of these words, I really like kind of like thinking about the processes that I'm working with.
Did you choose the words on the more subtle toned wall to be more subtle terms? Like do the colors of the words intersect?
I was thinking about how we talk about color, and so with the pastel wall, this is like the quiet wall, and then over here, this is the outspoken wall. And so yeah, I liked how like color also translates into language or like sound, and so that there's like a visual impact, which is either like impactful or more soft, and I like playing with that between the two series.
I really love the sort of words and the relations to not just the practice and color and what you're thinking through, but also I really like Geck, to fall on one's face.
Yeah, yeah, this one here. So Geck, to fall on one's face. Like this is actually the first solo show I've had in Toronto in 10 years. The first one was 2011 with Ryan Rice. And before that show, there were a number of things that just got canceled or didn't work out whatsoever. And it was kind of like a falling on one's face in terms of like an art practice. And I love how in skateboarding, you do learn to kind of like take bad falls publicly, and you get back up, and you know, there's nothing more inspiring than seeing somebody take a really bad fall and then getting up and doing what they intended on doing. And so that word, when I came across it, it was like, oh yeah, for sure.
These guys look familiar? What's this painting? No, I'm just kidding, but I do recognize those faces.
Yeah, well, I wanted to do some work on canvas, and I was really interested in working with like a bright yellow. Ever since I've done some work with my kayak, which is bright yellow, I've been really kind of engaged with that color. I feel silly now saying all that stuff. It's like yellow's my favorite color.
Don't feel silly. You're allowed to have a favorite color. There's lots of artists that have a favorite color, famously.
Yeah, well,
This is your yellow phase.
it's my, well, ever since that making that connection with yellow through kayaking, it's been something I've been interested in working with. And so in particular here, talking to our painting audience, like I wanted to work with lemon yellow because it's very transparent, and so the white of the canvas is actually really helping this glow, as it's a very thin layer of yellow. And then because I love working in oil paint, what we're seeing is cadmium orange line work with the brush, but it's wet into wet, and so you get what I really enjoy in terms of like a line. And playing with like those analogous colors of the yellow and the orange, I thought I would throw something with much more contrast on there, which is some phthalo green self-portraits. But this one is from when I was like much younger and had hair.
I wasn't going to say it, but like, I thought maybe this is a, fantasy projection.
Well, and then I made this self-portrait recently, and I've transferred them both onto this canvas. And it's funny because this one is recent, but I kind of look young, I find, in the way that I've done it. And I don't know, I just thought it was like a funny thing in terms of like thinking about age, like being younger, and then something more present, but also kind of like looking young, I guess. But I wanted to kind of like think about this kayak because I had made a sketch of it when I was at the Museum of Anthropology in Vancouver. And this is one of the few things in their collection from Labrador. Yeah. And this is from, I think it was like earmarked at like around 1900. And what I always appreciate about those model kayaks is just how closely those individuals would have been to that pre-colonial way of relating to the world, like with like a sealskin kayak. And so when like I'm spending time with that in the museum and able to spend time with it, draw it, and like think about it in relation to our family. And so that's why it kind of made sense to me to kind of put some self-portraits with it.
The little ones in collections are always so fascinating because they're never generalized. They're always so highly detailed, and you really could take that model and recreate a kayak in the present based off of the structure and the skins that they have put on them. Like, I totally get your interest in collections like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it struck me like, it felt like one time when I was drawing one of these miniature kayaks and kayakers that it was a little bit like a virtual reality or something, because I was like literally looking over the shoulder of this kayaker that had this experience of like a pre-colonial way of using a kayak. And the thing was covered in harpoons and different kinds of harpoons. It's a hunting boat, and this is something that I've been really like kind of asserting about the kayak with some different paintings, because when I think about indigenization and decolonizing, I was like, well, how does that manifest in kind of like physical ways? And for me, I'm thinking about like, oh, well, the kayak is like largely a recreational vehicle right now, but what if we thought about it the way it was created, which is as a hunting vehicle? So visiting collections and looking at those kayaks created by people that had such a rich pre-colonial knowledge, that's what's exciting for me about working with that stuff.